Elora was who? The silent slave with scripture-like scars. In 1858, how did 6 overseers fall under the harvest moon? Is every death more planned than the last? Was it ritual, rebellion, or something much older, slipping through the fields, without being noticed? And why is her name still used in Wake County whispers today? North Carolina, Wake County, 1858. Time is a string, and the fields start before sunrise and finish after nightfall, snugly drawn around the throat. Elora awakens to the scrape of wooden pails and the ring of the bell, to the hushed silence that comes after a danger that everyone is already aware of. She doesn't talk much. As if the day itself could not hold her words, her voice becomes a thread that flutters in the air and disappears as she does. The first thing she recalls is the salt that seared her eyes as her mother's hand was severed, the harbor entrance, and a deck covered in saline. Charleston's distance is not expressed in miles, but rather in divisions. Like a concealed scar buried beneath the fabric of every hour, she bears it with her. She is placed in Wake County's pens and sheds, where she is a shadow among the animals, and where the safest type of refuge is silence. She picks up the language of split hooves and curdled milk, of food and hay, of ropes that tighten on their own without assistance. The ground she walks on and the hours she spends breathing are owned by Silas Beaumont. Here, he is hardly the most blatantly harsh person. He favors the math of it. The sums are done by others. In order to make the melody last, Crow loves to whistle right before the lash. Mace, who has a scar on his cheek that resembles a rope, Flint, a boon, ash rig. Like the weather, their names circulate around the quarters. The day yields to them. It teaches the darkness to hold its breath. Elora researches distance, determines the duration of a glance, before it shatters like ice that has thawed. She uses heartbeats to count. From the shed to the well, she measures the number of footsteps. She keeps track of the prayers she is unable to utter out loud. She hums to herself when the labor slows down. Only a beat that existed in her bones before she had a name, a fragment so old that it lacks a birthplace. There is hardly any melody at all. However, when the iron rim of the bucket bites her skin, it steadies her hands. There are tiny cool patch of ground beneath the cypress, a copper coin lost and then forgotten, mercies, if that's what they can be called. The world is terribly, terribly clear just before a blow. She perceives the farm as a map of pressure spots in certain situations. The light-sucking smokehouse, the lane that traps wind and makes it loop till it becomes weaker. No matter how many times it is tamped, the fence post still wobbles. Unauthorized knowledge accumulates and fills her like a winter coat. Shop. The seasons of retribution are taught to her. Talking pauses when it looks like it could rain. The late summer molasses scent emanating from the men's boots. The way that any voice that declines makes the dogs agitated. She doesn't say no. She maintains the core intact while bending, like reeds. Her eyes do not close, but they remain low. The air changes and the ground trembles slightly around dusk. Horses on the road in a new pattern, approaching Beaumont land with a clean tack and an unexpected tempo. Before the sound reaches the ear, it passes through the dirt. At first glance, there is no discernible difference between a warning and a promise. The buzzing ends as Eleor stops at the well, the rope searing her palm. Iron rings against iron, short and bright like a struck star, somewhere beyond the cotton. The hooves then approach, pointing to a future that no one has yet given a name to. By the end of August, a stranger appears on the road, and the farm accepts him as the weather hits it with a rigidity that watches to see what breaks. Jonathan Redd is a young man who speaks to maps before he speaks to others. He has dry patience and cautious hands. He is called upon by Silas Beaumont to measure water, dig fresh veins through obstinate soil, and train the fields to drink when instructed. Jonathan listens to the land as though it may respond in numbers when he walks the furrows. A copper canteen he carries makes a faint clicking sound against his belt, resembling a tiny bell that refuses to make a call. He views Elora differently than other people do. He doesn't look for rage or compliance in her face. He lets his eyes move like shadows over her. He asks her the weight of the feed and the slope of the troughs when he finds her in the pens, and he hears the steady economy of someone who has mastered survival math. When she is unable to respond with words, she hums a brief line of music to maintain the silence. He doesn't recognize the song, and every bit of the pain within it. His silence is disliked by the overseers, as though to drown the strangers. Sums, Crow whistles. Mace makes jokes about mud-courting males. Flint refers to him as Book B Broke. Ash, Rig, and Boone exchange smirks like currency. They talk cheap until someone else has to pay for it. When Jonathan lingers, they start watching a Leora. They start keeping track of how frequently he picks the work over the swagger, the furrows over the porch, and the sheds over the home. Around her name, a new arithmetic emerges. After a storm, Jonathan asks Elora where the rain lingers the longest and draws trenches around the low terrain. She uses her chin to indicate. "What music does she hum?" he asks. She offers him a pulse that is older than the fields, a fraction that is hardly more than breath and rhythm. He tries and fails to form it on his tongue. He is softened by the failure. From the copper mouth, he offers her pure water. And for a brief while, the day doesn't taste like work. Kindness is seen by the farm in the same way as salt is seen, by a wound. Orders get more stringent. At dusk, tasks multiply. After dusk, the sheds come to life again. A location where the sourness of secrecy thickens the air and voices become softer. Some evenings, Eleora returns to the quarters with the gait of a person who has mastered walking without catching her ribs. She doesn't talk about it. Her voice becomes less genuine than her murmur. In Wake County, rumors spread like heat lightning. Abolition, according to some, is folded in Jonathan's papers. Some claim he has a soft spot for a girl who can sing. There is mention of fever. Debt is the same. With a laugh that never reaches the throat, the overseers start to laugh. Crow's whistle becomes as keen as a piece of glass. Mace pursues inquiries that only arouse fear. The dogs have no right to sniff a door that Flint allows them sniff. Then Jonathan is gone as easily as the weather. The lines he drew on the ground are waiting for water that no one will deliver, and the copper canteen is hanging on a nail in the shed one morning, dried as a husk. With a shrug, Silas labels it fever. Boone claims he was taken by the marsh. "The road," says Ash. Rig observes Elora without comment. She works as usual, but there is a change in the earth. Within her. She continues to play the same melody, but something beneath it has ceased finding deals. The nights grow chilly. Days defy cooling. The farm flaunts its brutality like a badge that has been polished for scrutiny. Without complaining, Eleora carries the hours, and when the bell eventually gives way to darkness, she lies awake and counts the places where a voice used to be and never will be. The air is as heavy as iron when September arrives, and the fields are ready for the harvest moon. The nights refuse to show mercy as the work continues until bodies are staggering. The overseers' hands and tongues becoming sharper. The season increased their power. Whips break like punctuation in a submissive language. In the bellies of the slaves, hunger coils. However, they are pushed harder, as though the yield included tiredness itself. As usual, Eleora bends, but something has changed inside her gait. She moves calmly and without asking. Permission, a cadence that hovers just above compliance. Her eyes stay downcast, but the quiet around her grows more intense, so quiet as to be unnerving. She no longer comforts herself by humming. Like signals intended for ears older than memory, the song fragments disappear into the night. Beneath the noise, those who share the quarters can make out faint words. Yoruba is a language that was almost extinct, but was never completely eradicated. She comes back from the sheds one evening with her lashes exposed her back. The welts, however, do not adhere to the strict harshness of leather, as if the overseers had traced something. They couldn't see, they intersect, bend, and curve in strange patterns. The blood has dried into patterns that resemble old sigils by daybreak. One of the captives, an elderly woman, looks at the marks and stays silent. Youngsters avoid Elora, muttering that she carries ghost-carved lettering. At night, when Eliora slips into the fields and falls into a fitful sleep. Some claim to witness her putting water onto soil or carefully arranging corn husks in rings with a ritualistic signity. Some people claim to hear her voice not just by itself, but also by echoes, a chorus made from shadows that never leave traces. The dogs won't follow her. As if warning against something invisible, their bodies tremble, their hackles rise, and they snarl low as they withdraw into corners. Despite feeling uneasy, the overseers ignore it, mercilessly honed to denial. Crow claws at his ribs and drinks more, as if to drown the discomfort. Mace lets out a larger chuckle, but it wanes at the edges. Cradling his rifle like a child, Flint wanders the fields. In between curses, Boone starts to spew forth prayers. Rig remains silent while Ash murmurs about bad omens, instead observing Elora with the skepticism of a man gazing at his own destiny. White and ruthless, the moon pulls tides even in soil that is landlocked. The nights shine too brightly to provide cover. Elora, however, walks fearlessly. She is transformed again into a scripture that no overseer can read as her scars glow, pale in the light. Stories among the enslaved start to take on the form of prophecies, such as the idea that a woman who has been marked by the gods cannot be broken by men, and that every lash she receives sharpens her, waiting for the right moment to be collected. Silas Beaumont spends more time locking himself in the house, his ledger stretched out in front of him like armor. He never enters the sheds after dark and never looks Elora in the eyes throughout the day. The farm itself becomes agitated. The tools disappear from the racks. Where they shouldn't, harvest blades gleam. Whispers that belong to no living tongue are carried by the wind as it moves strangely across the cotton rows. Eliora's shadow looms like a cord across the fields as the harvest moon rises to its full circle. She doesn't bow down to her anymore. Chores with the composure of someone keeping track of time, but with the fatigue of the broken. Though they are unable to identify it, the overseers sense it. Her quiet presses down on them more forcefully than any chain. The assurance of an hour still to come. They are unaware that something is waiting beneath the moon, honing its skills in the darkness when the fields become uncomfortable silence. The harvest moon, a white disk that observes without blinking, rises clear and enlarged. The cotton is turned by its light. Every shadow grows longer like a blade, and the fields are sharp and pale. They will not identify the uneasiness with which the overseers stroll. They were all burdened with rumors, like knights, Boone, Ash, Rig, Mace, Flint, and Crow. 6 men, each assured that the others would suffer before him, were bound by habit rather than loyalty. But none of them can tell where it starts when the first scream breaks the air. Before daybreak, the crow disappears. He silences his whistling, which was previously a continual ear ache. Initially, they think he has escaped or became blinded by alcohol in the swamp. His body, however, is found propped against a fence post with his throat open in a curve as exact as the moon above them when the fields are combed. It's not a ragged wound. Harvest steel was carefully considered before creating this work of art. Every guy thinks of the word ritual, but no one actually says it. The following evening is Mace's. He is discovered lying on the cane, his eyes gouged clean, and his corn kernels jammed so far into his sockets that root versus flesh. The hounds whimper instead of howl, and he is surrounded by the stench of iron. Even though there is no prospect of a storm, Beaumont's voice cracks, and the home shutters are shuttered. No slave exhibits the signs of insurrection, despite Flint's insistence that they face rebellion. The quarters are still silent, with hands occupied and heads bent. When questions are posed, only Elora is not present. The murders seem to be carried out by invisible hands. Boone found within the smokehouse. The hook used to hang carcasses was pierced through the chest. The body of Ash sways in the river. His ankles were twisted with weeds. The barn has rig cornered. The blunt back of a scythe fractured his head. Every death is unique. However, they all have a symmetry and a deliberate approach, as though the land itself requires precise restitution for years of unresolved disputes. The others have fallen asleep by the time Flint does. He is discovered under the cypress, his gun twisted and bent next to him, blood mixed with the roots. 6 deaths, 6 overseers. Every wounded person describes hands that are familiar with. The implements of work, hands that are used to bending soil rather than men. With the same solemnity as psalms, whispers ascend through the quarters. During the night, they describe Elora moving, her scarred back shining with markings that change like living text. Her eyes were not focused on anything, and her silence was as heavy as shackles, masters but balanced. Beaumont shuts himself in his study, whiskey drained and drapes drawn. He mutters names in unintelligible tongues, Yoruba words broken apart, syllables heard in the fields. He is now fluent in what he formerly hated because of his fear. There is no wind, but the cotton sways outside. Tools disappear, only to resurface covered in blood. The stench of smoke and iron permeates the dirt. Nobody notices take the sickle, Elora. She makes the following marks, but no one sees. However, every man senses her presence in the pause, before the next step, in the silence between heartbeats, and in the knowledge that death now traverses Beaumont's territory barefoot. The harvest moon, which is brilliant enough to light everything hidden, hangs over the shallow, rushed burial of the final supervisor. There is silence on the farm. There are no more 6 males. The weight of something completed and something starting is in the air, unable to be distinguished from one another. There's no sign of Aurora. However, it seems as though the soil itself is carrying her onward, echoing every cut, sacrifice, and blood-stained vow, making her absence seem louder than her presence. The whip is replaced by quiet as the final wagon leaves the fields and the lint dust settles. Only the weight that remains after a storm counts its dead can be considered peace. Beaumont remains in his study, surrounded by a wall of ledgers and bottles. He steals the syllables that make up his voice, from prayers he didn't trust. Graves outside lean as like they're listening. The harvest moon has shrunk to a ragged coin, and there are 6 men below them. A writer with a badge and a notebook that looks like the truth arrives from the county. He writes accident, fevered man, and unknown party on the rows, then crosses them out until the page is gray. He won't be led by the dogs, as though the soil itself would not testify. They are familiar with both wine and the dirt. His eyes are sunk to dirt when he asks for names. When he wonders where Elora sleeps, she tells him that the wind can reach anywhere. He discovers a copper canteen in the sheds that has been polished by a hand that took care of it. When he rattles it, all he hears is the silence of metal recalling water. A rust-colored smear forms a crescent on the doorframe at the height of a woman's shoulder. He leaves the mark on his own skin after wiping it off with his sleeve. Knight thinks the album will say as little as possible and gets together early. Paper likes the security of uncertainty. The message is signed by Beaumont with a quivering flourish. When he reads the formal words, he feels as though they cannot contain what has transpired. His sleep breaks. He wakes up with mispronounced terrified Yoruba names stuck in his mouth. He hears a song in his nightmares that moves without feet. By he imagines he sees her shadow, where the sun does not form it as he scans the yard for a figure that does not appear. Stories learn to move quietly in the quarters. After dark, children are instructed to keep their eyes open and their voices level. An elderly woman is intolerant of inquiries and makes sluggish circles in ashes. The name Elora becomes a doorway. Some take a leap of faith while others exercise prudence. They talk of a debt and a back that is etched like scripture, at last counted. As though the family name must be buried with the white men who possessed it, they only refer to Jonathan Red by his first name. The author pursues a prince along the riverbank one evening who is no bigger than a girl's, nude and squeezed deep. They move in a line into mud, then water, and finally nothing. On the far side, he waits for them to resume, but they don't. The river maintains its streamlined counsel. He writes, "Rebellion," after he gets home. "Unconfirmed," he writes, closing his book on that unanswered question. Time starts sanding edges again. Cotton is planted repeatedly. However, as if the land had learnt a new key, a low, precise hum returns to the air at the start of each season. The rows resemble the pages of an open text on light nights. People who bend between them say they occasionally feel a hand guiding the blade into balance by stabilizing their wrists. Individuals who formerly oversaw the act as though you can't hear anything and jump at each shadow that moves too near. Whether Iliora crossed the river or the river crossed over her is up for debate. Whether the marks on her back were made by volition or by whipping is up for debate. The math she left behind is all that's left. There were 6 names that responded. A canteen without a ring. A ledger that is unable to justify its own ink. Something else moves when the wind passes through the cotton. Along with it, a rhythm devoid of footsteps. A breath that feels like mercy and judgment coming at the same time.